subjects. I'm from St. Petersburg. I'm specializing in Indian philosophy in general and in Buddhist Indian philosophy in particular. I'm the author of rather numerous translations from Pali and Sanskrit language, of the philosophical and narrative texts. Also, I'm interested in Indian linguistics, the Vyakana, the indigenous Indian linguistics, as one of the fundamentals of the peculiar Indian style of philosophizing. Well, then, see, one of our eminent linguists, Professor Sherman, once said, one has to be a very qualified philologist in order to be able to translate texts which you do not understand. But I think even this doesn't suffice in the case of being obliged to translate a text from a different civilization. So the crucial point is the borderline between the mere textual, philological, or exegetical approach and that of the philosophical grasping of the meaning of the text, which belong to the tradition quite alien to the Western one, and having having another origin. The history of Buddhology, said Alice, abides in arbitrary translations and in persisting obsolete translation, which leaves the naive reader of the translation quite in absence of the sense of the so-called translated text. For example, 150 or maybe more years ago, the Satyas, the four Satyas, which were the subject matter of the first discourse of the Bhagavan Buddha, were rendered as noble truths. They are neither noble nor truths, because Arya is not a noble one. It is the social term, pre-Buddhist term. Arya means who wants to become the master of himself and his life. And Satya doesn't mean a truth at all, because I briefly describe. Let it be a preface. Yes, I'll briefly describe it. Because Satya is quite a strict notion in our Western tradition. Satya is what can we do with truth? What can we do with any truth? Truth is fit only for one purpose: to be understood, grasped, and so on. And when Buddha says that about the Satya number 2, namely the origin of the suffering, it is to be abandoned, it is absurdity. Truth cannot be abandoned. That's first. Then, when it is said that it is noble truth as it is addressed to the nobles, it is another absurdity, because the truth is a notion in which we disregard any addressee. It is whether he is a rascal, whether he is a saint, whether he is a dull person, whether he is a genius, the truth remains the same. If some content is addressed to a number of students, it is not truth. It is something else. I can't say. Nobody can say that it is falsity, but it is not truth. It is inappropriate. So, no. Well, even the learned monks, with Buddhist monks, where the native English as native tongue persist in this absurdity. It's strange to read modern translations. Yes. Well, then another example is the almost total misinterpretation of the term nirvana, which was the medium or the means of explaining something when Buddha taught. So the word nirvana is self-obvious. Well, it became the question, the theme, after some 100 years after the Buddha's death. And then they abound also the misinterpretations, although it can be this notion and the intention coined in this term can be explained quite rationally. And now I'll come to the very theme of my report. It is perhaps we all know that one of the main, to say it, tenets of the Buddhist thought are the so-called five skandhas, which are almost universally rendered as five aggregates. Then, afterwards, I'll enumerate all these five skandhas. First, what this rendering as aggregates is based upon. It's based upon one remark from the Abhidharma Kosha Bhashya of Vasubandhu, where when he explains that the technical term skandha is used in the Rashyartham, in the term Rashi as heap. And it is for the translators, it is enough to say that it is aggregation, heap, and so on, but it is not the case. The dictionary gives among others, the following meanings of this word: shoulders. Then the stem or a trunk of a tree with boughs. So you see, it is a common shape. Yes. If I am a trunk, yes. What? Then military array, army. Then division, and so on. And when he says Rashyarthya, he says that don't think about shoulders, about stem of the trunk, and so on, about military. Think otherwise. It is just as it was put by Dignaga in his Apohavada theory. When I say computer, in any context, it is meant not, for example, a telephone. And I do not mean not a man or not a table, because the computer is also plausible as a telephone, in a context. So he said that exclusion of the inappropriate. Vasubandhu uses this form of definition, which is not Aristotle's definition by Horos, by the species and the individual. Well, then all these five skandhas are enumerated in Sanskrit as rupa, which is
matter.
No, which is sometimes translated matter. For example, Monia Williams in his diction translated as physical. It is irrelevant. It is not so, because because the rupa means first shape.
Okay.
Yes. The image in a television set and me in flesh have the same rupa, but I have a material body, and this one does not. And it is called rupa there. So secondly, and it is anecdote, because sometimes in one context the same word, technical term rupa, is translated by Buddhologists as matter, in other contexts as form. You imagine the anger of Aristotle, because form is not matter, but so they are thinking, but being unaware of it in Aristotle's or in Western terms, and it seems for them self-evident that everyone is bothered with the problem of, for example, matter and form, but it is quite alien to the Buddhist thinkers. They are interested in other things. The second skandha is Vedana, which is regularly translated as sensation, but it is not sensation. It has two main meanings. First, experience as something in which I remain passive. I have experience for it in a museum and so on, of a code. And second, pain. Here, the first one deserves our attention. The third one is in Sanskrit is Sanjna. It is regularly translated as perception. It is not perception, because you see this term is used in Hindu and in Buddhist philosophy in two adjacent meanings. The Buddhists prefer the active side, that it is I have some representations, I understand that something is the content of mind consciousness. But the Hindus prefer the objective side, because the first meaning of the word skandha is name, term, denomination, designation, and so forth. And it is well known for everyone who studied Buddhist philosophy that the definite perception as introduced by the school of Dignaga Dharmakirti is something resulted from the anumana, from the inference, and which is possible to unite with a word image. And so this act of uniting with the word image is one Buddhist side, and the word image, or some verbal expression, is other side. Yes. So it is what is, I think there is almost nothing in common with this translation of Sanjna as a perception. Then the fourth one are, in plural, sanskaras, which are translated as karmic formation or something like that, which perhaps it is not erroneous, but it tells us almost nothing. And the fifth one is vijnana, which is sometimes and predominantly it is translated as consciousness. Sometimes not so. Sometimes as perception instead of sanjna. Nothing is the case. For example, it is said in Buddhist texts that an embryo, in the very first moment of his being in a womb, has vijnana. Does he have perception? No. Does he have vijnana? Does he have consciousness? No more. Yes. So it is quite inappropriate. And that's I conclude first that all translations of the members of this list are erroneous. We cannot reconstruct the concept which underlies them. Nobody poses the question. I think it is as such. Why there are 5 components? Why not 4 or 6? What's the concept? Yes. Then, what's the law underlining this group of 5 concepts? Then, what piece of knowledge is it altogether? To who? What it is about? To whom is it addressed? If it is not stated thoughtlessly as a Buddhist dogma or a Buddhist tenet, it is described as something like a Buddhist, the core of the Buddhist philosophical anthropology. So the human being comprises 5 constituents, which I enumerated. But even this is not the case. So now I'll try to dissolve all these problems. First, if we read the early Buddhist texts, the Pali Suttas, the Mahayana Suttas, which are a bit less earlier, we find that the theme and the enumeration of the 5 skandhas abound there. Nobody seems perplexed by this tenet. They seem that all participants understand what they are talking about. The Buddhologist, the scholar, doesn't understand what they are talking about, and doesn't understand why they understand, and doesn't pose himself a question: what's the case? If everybody understands, I do not. What is? How can I solve the problem? Well, then you see, I think that one of the deep roots of this mischief is the disregard that the Buddhist tradition is a methodological one. I'm myself a philosophical Buddhist, and I regard Buddha as a great methodologist and a great phenomenologist. So, as any methodological tradition doesn't doesn't see the distinction between the pedagogical and theoretical as an ultimate one. And so every discourse is within the circumstances and aims some purposes which cannot be said practical, because practice is a practice of a theory. It is, or to say, or to use the term practice metaphorically, is the practice of self-observation and self-enlightenment, something like that. Well, then, first of all, this term, the 5 skandhas, with the addition upadana skandhas. That's to mean the skandhas to which an individual is clinging on. was mentioned in the first discourse of the Buddha in Varanasi, and it is put in this discourse. It is put in the place that so that we can see it is the ultimate, more profound level of the being determined in samsara, and that which we have to get rid of if we are pleased with the Buddha's program. Buddha didn't reveal any truths. He proposed a program to those who want to be like him. And these are the four satyas. The four satyas are the four aspects of the Buddhist philosophical and existential program. Because in each explaining each satya, first he said, this is such and such satya. Second, what is to be done with it? And third, he assured, I have managed to do so. And this third component is the only tiny layer of this discourse in which we need faith, or better to say belief, because it is no way out. If I say I can something in every circumstance, either you believe me or not, and it is no religion at all. It's inevitable. So this concept of this construction of sakyas was addressed to the disciples, to speak technically to Shravakas, because only Shravakas, which attains the Shrota Apanna level, get rid of the reification as substantialization of self-image, and do not think of themselves and I am, for example, the material shape, or I am consciousness, or the consciousness is mine, or consciousness is in me. And instead of these four formulations, me, mine, in me, I, in these four formulations, he thinks of himself as a multi-process. And these five constituents are multi-process, are the strings of multi-process. So, well, as such, this it is a privileged scheme of self-observation of the Buddhist disciple. And a scheme of self-observation is not a theory. And it is described and prescribed so to exhaust itself in the course of practice. Because it is almost self-evident that any self-observation leads to changing of the observer. And some value is certainly presupposed. And if I observe some negative value in myself, even the mere fact of this observation eliminates it step by step. And that's the case with which takes place with every Buddhist disciple. That's first. Then, secondly, certainly, because metaphysically speaking, the early Buddhism to which this tenet belongs to was realistic. So I understand that you, if you are also a Buddhist disciple, are just like me. So I can speak about your skandhas. But first of all, these are my skandhas. And any speech about the skandhas of a dog or an elephant is sheer absurdity. Because these living creatures cannot be Buddhist disciples. So it is not a theory of a living being at all. Maybe there was some bias afterwards with some theoreticians, but initially it was not the case. Now then, what about this the law, because of which we have only 5 elements, but not 4, 6, 7, and so on. Some such groups of 5 elements are widespread not in every, but in some schools of Indian philosophies. For example, in Yoga of Patanjali, in Kashmir Shaivism, in all schools of Buddhism. I have collected numerous dozens of such groups, And in all these cases, we have the same structure. We have two pairs of opposites which are indifferent to each other, and the fifth constituent who makes it a united structure. And for example, before these scandals, we have 5 regimes of Chitta in Yoga Sutra. The Chitta, Mudha, Vikshipta, Ekagra, and Niruddha. And it is this structure. Or, for example, we also in Yoga Sutras we have 5 kleshas. It is clinging, aversion, avidya, clinging to oneself, and aversion to one's own death. And it is also a pair of opposites, and with the unifying avidya in the center. So what is it here? The first pair of opposites concerns the we have our mind is capable of two types of activities. First, the cognition. Second, the management of our behavior. And the management of our behavior involves the evaluation of something coming from the outer world and organizing something coming into the outer world. And these are the skandhas number 2 and number 4. And the process of cognition involves the material to be understood, to be made sense of, and the result of making sense. And these are rupa and sanjna. Initially, I'll make a brief example, the visual field. The extremely naive person can say that he sees me, that's a man with mustache, with a blue shirt, with red tie, and so on. But it is not so, because one has to know what is a mustache, what is this shirt, what is the tie, and what is known is not what is seen. What is seen is technically rupa, by which is seen by the sight, technically certainly. When a Buddhist yogi persists in self-observation, what is with the aim, what is really seen? What is really seen? That it is there in the outer world, and I simply discover it. Then we see the gradual transition from the side of the rupa to the side of the sanjna. On the one of the steps, it is stated, for example, in Abhidharma Kosha, it is said that only shapes and colors are seen, are rupa, and everything other which has sense is not rupa. But then they go 2 steps further. It is said that even shapes are thought, and only colored spots are seen. And in the ultimate step, it is said that everything is the fog of what is one color fog. It is. I can explain it so. When a yogi stops voluntarily the tremor of the eye of the pupil, all the perception cells get exhausted. And really we see nothing except this grey fog. And thus it is an experiential demonstration that we see nothing except the great fog, because the movement of the eyes is our activity, and our activity is not there in the world, it is ours. The same can be said about what is heard, what is smelled, and so on. So the inner law of this first axis in the tantric mandalas, tantric drawings, it is always represented as vertical axis. It is to see experientially that which was attributed formerly by me when I was a naive, worldly, samsaric person to the outer world are all traces of my activity. When it is completed, there is no need anymore in the notions of rupa and sanjna, because they are worked out. And as it is said numerously in the sutras, Buddha has no skandhas, because he doesn't work with this notion anymore. The second pair of opposites is Vedana, it's the passive side, and Sanskara, which is the active side. Also, let's take extremely naive person. He says that an anger or falling in love occurs to him. It is experience. He is passive. But when we observe ourselves, we come to the point that we become witness of our first involuntary and now voluntary, and then we get rid of it. The cooperation of being angry, to be angry, we agree to be angry. And if we discover it, the anger cannot be the part of the Vedana of experience, it's a part of karmic formations, because it's our inner activity. The same can be said about the comprehension, prajna, about the smriti, memory, about love, about other passions, and so on. So departing from the naive worldview and view of the self, according to which we have very multifarious experiences. We are affected by them. We, near the end of the Buddhist past, we come to the experiential conclusion, but almost everything was and is, or if we are not against it, created by us. That's why are they karmic formations. The only thing, or the only aspect of event which remains in according to which we remain passive is that we feel pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. In these cases, we're utterly passive. Certainly, we can be sure to make myself, I'm sure, as every sensible person, to make myself any pleasure and to avoid pain. But strictly speaking, I am working with the causes of the pleasure and the pain, and not with them themselves, and they simply occur, and I'm passive. That's first and one. These are two axes, now I conclude with the fifth element, which is Vijnana. Vijnana is, etymologically speaking, it is this or that with choice. We are, according to our construction, we discover in self-observation, if we are Buddhist practitioners, that in every case in which we, for example, are listening, and then something a flash happens, and when we switch to the visual canal, or for example, we are seeing something, and then a sudden noise happens, then we switch involuntarily to this canal. So if there were no such constant switches or persisting in the same canal, we would have been unable to make sense of the sensual of that which comes through to the sensual faculties from the outer world, and this is called Vijnana, because Vijnana is associated with vision, with ear, and so on. I call it. We have no. It is quite alien for the European stream of thought, because to discover Vijnana is indispensable only in one in the case we want to get rid of samsara. But what is it? It is transcendental choice. Transcendental in the strict sense of term introduced by Kant, that it is the precondition of every experience, but not the experience itself. I can describe the act of Vijnana as now something is to be seen. This is seen, it is sanjna. Or now, if something has not decided which canal, which Vijnana is open, we have no mechanisms to make sense of the sensual data, and we have neither pleasant nor unpleasant sensation, nor any active nor any reaction, as for example anger, aversion, and so on. We cannot decide whether this is something or not, because previously to decide, we have to understand that it is to be seen. I'll show it. Well, an example may be shown in the case when we are constantly speaking, speaking one of two languages, and if by chance a phrase coincides in both languages, we can make no sense at all unless we understand in which language it is said. My favorite example is when I say in a group of people who speak both Persian and Russian on chist, one is in perplexion, because in Persian it is said, "What is it?" and in Russian it means it is clean. And it is quite observable. So why the Buddhists introduced this fifth element and the central element? Because there are two independent layers of our two causal chains. First, the mechanism of making sense of the visual stimulus is not that this making sense of other stimulus, for example, audio stimulus, and this persists even in the Buddha, within the Buddha. But the second is that these mechanisms are, in an ordinary or sansaric man, strictly confined to these object fields, because I can recognize a shape only by means of visual consciousness. When visual consciousness, and this visual consciousness becomes working after the act of Vijnana, after the abolition of Vijnana. I think the Buddhists believe that any Buddha and any Buddhist as an arhat is able to employ any mechanism of making sense, disregarded to which sense field it belongs. For example, it is known well that we are subconsciously conditioned by the smelling, by the smell, which is used in supermarket, for example. And on the contrary, we are not conditioned subconsciously by the sight, and I can see you, for example, in the center, and also see in the periphery all others. I am unable to do so because I'm not Buddha with smells. If I were the Buddha, I will be able to do so. But because this mechanism is more elaborate. Well, and so I mentioned a bit enigmatic Buddhist assertion that also in an embryo, or before even becoming an embryo, being a Gandharva, technically speaking, that's a disembodied consciousness which is ready to come into the womb. There functions Vijnana. If Vijnana within our life, from our childhood until our death, is the transcendental choice between the sense fields, and certainly the common reason is one of the sense fields, according to the then in the disembodied state, it is also the transcendental choice of the of the rebirth. It is the act of choosing. Of the choosing, it will be a man again, or perhaps a celestial being, or perhaps an elephant, and so on. So the feature is common. It is the transcendental. It is a transcendental choice in the consequence of which we have such and such, for example, human, celestial, animal, and so on experience, or for example, visual, audio, and so on experience. So it is a strict notion, fivefold notion, in which the Buddhist disciple is training himself to be a witness of his activity and of his sense making and as the one axis, so the other axis are indispensable for our being and reproduction in samsara. The process of self-observation according to this axis exhausts the samsara. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. 10 minutes for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I have many questions. Maybe this is not question, it's more for clarification. So when you're talking about the Arya Satta, and then you said that this is a truth, and then next and third one is abandon the truth. So maybe are you taking this truth as in like Sanskrit dharma or a Sanskrit dharma, like in that level truth? No. So So if you are going to take in that way, then you can say this is a third one is like I abandoned the truth. Right, but this is not the case, I feel, right?
But it is distortion of the terminology.
No, yeah.
This truth is very strict notion.
No.
It is a verbal expression which corresponds to the reality.
No, so when suppose you saw a snake, I mean take a rope snake, it's a very common classic example in Buddhism. So when you saw a snake, I said, look, this is not a snake, this is rope, right? And finally he came and I said, oh, this is nothing, this is a rupa skanda, right? So do you mean that he is abandoning the truth, which I said? No, this is the different way of seeing the same truth. So basically, when you are saying that this is an Arya Satta as a truth, so are you saying that?
Well, there's another facet, because the notion of truth presupposes the stability of the subject to who grasps the truth. But the methodological character of Buddhist philosophy presupposes just the opposite. The subject doesn't remain the same. So it is not conditioned to imply to use this word, to use this term, because I think it is tacitly accepted universally, but that the comprehension or acquisition of any truth doesn't change the subject to whom it occurs. It is only his property or his immaterial property, his knowing of the truth. But if he is not the same, we cannot use this word.
The truth.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So there is an objective standard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So next is I have another like about the rupa, right? We talk about in AKP, like Abhidham's Matsangro, right? So let's taken help from Siddhiman, another authority of Buddhist philosophy, right? Written by Nenamali and later on translated by Buddha Goswami. So in that particular text, you'll find that they have gone to such extent that they have talked about the 4 elements, right? Like matter, air, fire, and water. So if you are saying that rupa is not matter, then what is that? Which is necessary to Siddhiman.
Let me see. Rupa is the material which comes to my consciousness, to be made sense of. I see, for example, a gray or a red